You check the time without thinking. A glance at your phone. A quick look at the clock on the wall. You do it dozens of times a day. But have you ever stopped and wondered, how did your ancestors know what time it was? Not just the hour, the season, the month, how far away the next full moon was. How many days until the river flooded, or the herd returned, or the baby was due? For roughly 300,000 years, humans had no clocks, no calendars, no written numbers. And yet they tracked time. Not approximately, not vaguely, with a precision that would stun most people alive today. They did it by scratching marks in a bone. In 1960, a geologist named Jean de Haenzelin was excavating near the headwaters of the Nile River at a site called Ishango, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Buried in volcanic ash, he found a small brown bone, about the size of a pencil. It was roughly 20,000 years old, and carved into its surface were 3 rows of tiny, deliberate notches. These weren't random. The groups of notches on one column added up to 60. On another, 48. Some groups contained prime numbers, 11, 13, 17, 19. And one entire row seemed to track numbers that rose and fell in a pattern matching the phases of the moon. This was the Ishango bone, and to this day, it remains one of the most debated artifacts in human history. Was it a mathematical tool? A lunar calendar? A tally stick for counting kills or trades? Whatever it was not the work of a primitive mind. But the Ishango bone wasn't even the oldest. Go further back, roughly 43,000 years, and you reach the Lubombo bone. Found in Border Cave, high in the Lubombo Mountains between South Africa and Eswatini. This small baboon fibula has exactly 29 notches carved along its length. 29. That's the number of days in a lunar cycle. Your ancestors didn't need anyone to teach them this. They looked up. Every night, the moon told them something. It swelled. It shrank. It vanished. Then it came back. And after watching this pattern repeat hundreds of times across a lifetime, they started recording it. A notch for each night. A bone that could tell them where they were inside a cycle they couldn't control, but could absolutely predict. Think about what that means. Over 40,000 years ago, someone sat in a cave, held a sharp stone tool, and carefully cut marks into a bone. Not to eat, not to hunt, not to build, but to understand. In 1972, a researcher at Harvard named Alexander Marshack changed the entire conversation. He had been studying upper Paleolithic bones and antlers from sites across Europe, some dating back 30,000 years. Upper Paleolithic, that's the last stretch of the Old Stone Age, roughly 50,000 to 10,000 years ago. Under a microscope, he noticed something others had dismissed. The tiny marks carved into these artifacts weren't random scratches or idle doodles. They were made with different tools, at different times, in sequences that accumulated over weeks or months. At a rock shelter called Aubry Blanchard in southern France, Marshack examined a bone plaque covered in curved, pitted marks. He mapped every single one. The pattern closely followed the waxing and waning of the moon across 2.5 months. His conclusion was radical at the time. These were notation systems, sequential records, time-keeping devices made of bone, created by people who supposedly hadn't invented writing for another 25,000 years. Not everyone agreed. Some archaeologists argued the marks were decorative or accidental. But Marshack's microscopic evidence was hard to dismiss. The marks were too consistent, too sequential, and too lunar to be coincidence. Later researchers like Francesco D'Erico applied even more advanced imaging techniques and confirmed that many of these bones showed deliberate, cumulative marking, someone adding a notch, then coming back days later to add another, then another, then another. Your ancestors were journaling in bone. So let's reconstruct what this actually looked like. Picture this. It's dusk on an open grassland, roughly 30,000 years ago. The sky turns orange. A small group sits around a fire. One of them, maybe a woman, maybe an elder, pulls a small bone from a leather pouch. She holds it up to the fading light and studies the notches. Then she takes a sharp flint flake and adds one more mark. She knows, without language for it, without a word for calendar or month, that the moon will be full again in 6 more notches. She knows the rains are coming. She knows the herd will move soon. She puts the bone back. That bone is her clock, her calendar, her weather forecast, and no one taught her to make it. She inherited the practice from someone older, who inherited it from someone older still, reaching back thousands of years into the dark. Now here's the twist. This wasn't just passive observation. Tracking time changed how humans thought. It introduced something your brain takes for granted today: sequential thinking. Before and after. Cause and effect. If the moon looks like this now, then in 14 notches it will look like that. If the river flooded after the last full moon, it may flood after the next one. This is the birth of prediction. And prediction is the birth of planning. And planning is what separated your ancestors from nearly every other species on the planet. Not strength, not speed, not claws or venom. The ability to think in sequences, to place themselves inside a pattern and project forward. By 10,000 years ago, this instinct had grown enormous. At a site called Warrenfield in Crafts, Scotland, a team led by the archaeologist Vince Gaffney discovered a row of 12 large pits carved into the earth, each pit aligned with a different lunar month. Together, they formed a calibrated arc that tracked the lunar cycle and corrected for seasonal drift by aligning with the midwinter sunrise. Gaffney's team, publishing in 2013, called it the oldest known calendar monument in the world. It predates the first Mesopotamian calendars by nearly 5,000 years. Your ancestors didn't just watch the sky. They built the sky into the ground. And here's the part that should stop you. You check the time dozens of times a day. You glance at your phone. You look at the clock on the wall. You're surrounded by time, sliced into hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. You have more precision than any human who ever lived. And yet most people today feel like they never have enough of it. They feel rushed, overwhelmed, out of sync. Your ancestors had no clocks, no deadlines, no time zones. They had a bone with 29 scratches and a sky that never lied. And with that, they navigated seasons, migrations, pregnancies, floods, and the full arc of a human life. Maybe the weirdest thing about how ancient humans kept track of time isn't the bones or the pits or the notches. Maybe it's that they understood time better with less of it to measure. You check the time without thinking. They carve it into bone and thought about nothing else.